It's Legal Line on today's WPSD Local 6 Midday. Attorneys from the Bryan Law Center are our guests. Teris, Swanson in the middle, Kevin Shannon, the handsome dude on my far left, and we're here to answer your questions. Then the first topic is about divorce. And we do have a question from Mickey who says, I'm currently involved in a lawsuit from an injury I got in a car wreck. Will I have to split the settlement with my spouse? Teris, what do you think?
Well, that's a bit of a tricky question. I would need to look at the settlement to see exactly how it's set out. Typically, anything that is reimbursing you for loss of income would be marital property, so that may have to be split up. However, a lot of settlements aren't really set apart like that, so it becomes difficult to parse out, well, what is to compensate me for medical bills? What is to compensate me for my lost income or pain and suffering? So that can be difficult, so you definitely need to contact an attorney about what of that may be marital and non-marital.
Kevin, in talking about the car wreck that the guy would have been involved in, I mean, that's an area you see a lot of. Anything you'd like to add to that?
No, the only other thing that I could think of is the spouse that was not involved in the wreck may have presented a claim for loss of spousal consortium. So kind of like what Teris was talking about, you'd want to make sure you look at the settlement agreement closely, make sure there was no allocation for any loss of spousal consortium.
Question from Marcia, who says, the trust I inherited from my parents has both of our names on it. Does that mean that my ex will get half of my inheritance?
Well, that's kind of like the last question. I would like to see those documents before I could, best answer that question. Typically, gifts, whether they're through an inheritance or otherwise, are only a part of, they belong to the person they were given to, not their non-marital property. So you'd have to talk to, if your parents are still alive, talk to them what was their intent on giving that, and if they're not, look at other evidence to see who that gift was to.
Another question from Charlie, who says, I'm getting a divorce after 5 years of marriage. Will I have to give my wife half of my 401k?
Well, I don't know about half, but typically how 401ks or any sort of retirement works is whatever funds were put into it during the length of the marriage, those would be split up. Those are marital property, and whatever funds were put in outside of the marriage are non-marital property. So again, you need to look at those documents and have an attorney help you parse out what is what.
We have time for one last quick question, and this lady who's anonymous says, my husband and I want to use the same attorney. Is that a good idea?
It's actually technically not even possible. The attorney is supposed to only represent one party. They cannot represent both parties. It becomes a conflict of interest. Now, some attorneys will say that they can do it, and I would advise against that because you want someone who's going to protect you. Now, one attorney can do all the paperwork, but it's not advisable. You need someone who's going to protect each of your individual rights.
Teris, Swanson, Kevin Shannon have been our guests from the Bryan Law Center on this edition of Local 6 Legal Line. They'll return here in about 20 minutes, and they'll be taking your questions regarding personal injury.